Hello, this Thursday morning. Today, virtues for a crisis. Once more, looking at those Christian virtues which are particularly useful in times of change and trouble. And today, looking at prudence. Now, prudence is not a word you hear a lot these days, but it is definitely a Christian virtue. What the word prudence means is a kind of practical wisdom. In fact, there are three words that are very closely related, and sometimes in the Bible they seem almost interchangeable. And those three words are prudence, wisdom, and knowledge. But today I particularly want to talk about prudence because it's a practical wisdom that is revealed primarily in the decisions we make and the actions that we do. It's not wisdom which is just wordy. Prudence is how we live. And a key element in prudence is thinking ahead. Thinking ahead to consider possible consequences. The prudent person has a look at both the risks and opportunities that follow from various decisions that they might take. The prudent person is focused on avoiding disaster and steering a wise course through life. And this is why it's one of those Christian virtues that is particularly valuable in times of chaos or uncertainty or difficulty. As I say, sometimes the Bible calls it knowledge, and that's fine as long as we understand that this is a knowledge of life. It is not the knowledge that you will generally acquire in school or in a textbook. Here's an example from Proverbs 18. The heart of the discerning acquires knowledge, for the ears of the wise seek it out. So the idea there is that it's about being discerning, and that discernment is prudence. For instance, the King James Version says this: the heart of the prudent acquires knowledge, and the ear of the wise seeks knowledge. The heart of the prudent, or as the NIV says, the heart of the discerning. So it's not about gathering data, it's about learning how life works. You're more likely to get this kind of knowledge from talking to someone like an experienced police sergeant or a successful market trader than from a schoolmaster or office administrator. And we need prudence. And the reason we need prudence is because we live in a world that we don't understand. A world which is unpredictable because we don't know half of what's going on. And there's one book in the Bible which is completely focused on this problem of living in a world which to us seems quite random so often. And that's the book of Ecclesiastes. Ecclesiastes all the way through is dealing with the problem of uncertainty, of ignorance, of not knowing what's up, what's about us, and quite often what we should do. Here's an example from Ecclesiastes 3. Now, lots of people love that poem in Ecclesiastes 3. There's a time for this and a time for that and a time for something else. And it is a beautiful poem, but at the end of it, this is what the writer says. What do workers gain from their toil? I have seen the burden God has laid on the human race. He has made everything beautiful in its time. He has also set eternity in the human heart. Yet no one can fathom what God has done from beginning to end. Yes, there is beauty. Yes, there are intimations of immortality and God's divinity but we don't understand what God is up to. And various people react to this unpredictability of life in different ways. And one very usual way of reacting to life being so unpredictable is to resort to meaningless chatter. Not just Ecclesiastes, all the wisdom books of the Bible really are hard on empty words, meaningless talk. And here's an example from Ecclesiastes 10. Fools multiply words. No one knows what is coming. Who can tell someone else what will happen after them? That's Ecclesiastes 10:14. Fools multiply words. No one knows what is coming. There are so many pointless books, so many meaningless newspaper articles, empty opinions, silly conversations. Where words are many, folly is not lacking. Here's another reading also from Ecclesiastes chapter 9. I've seen something else under the sun. The race is not to the swift, or the battle to the strong, nor does food come to the wise, or wealth to the brilliant, or favour to the learned. But time and chance happen to them all. Moreover, no one knows when their hour will come, as fish are caught in a cruel net, or birds are taken in a snare, so people are trapped by evil times that fall unexpectedly upon them. Now that is true, isn't it? Life is so unpredictable, and people often complain that life is not fair, because they think if life were fair, then the race would go to the fastest person, the battle would go to the strongest, or the wise man would eat well, or really brilliant people would be wealthy. I've met a few people who think they're brilliant and can't understand why they're not wealthy. Of course, they might not be brilliant. Anyway, moving on. What this tells us is that all we can hope for in a world that is so unpredictable is prudence. The ability to at least avoid the worst harm, to make good judgment calls. Nothing will totally insulate us from life's ups and downs, but it is definitely the truth that the prudent man or the prudent woman will find a much better, safer, and less grievous way through life than the fool who just multiplies words. Our departed sister Iona Simon, every time I went to see her, when she wasn't able to get to church very often, there was one sentence I think I'd always hear from her virtually, and she would say, "There's a purpose to everything, you know. There's a purpose to everything, you know." And it took me a while to realise what she was doing when she was saying that. To start with, I thought she was saying that Christians know what the purpose of everything is, but she wasn't. She was saying the opposite. It was a statement of faith. She believed in God, and therefore she believed that although she didn't know what the purpose was, he did. There's a purpose to everything, you know. Very similar to Ecclesiastes. God knows what he's up to, but we sure don't. So what do? We live by faith. And as we live by faith, we try to exercise a bit of prudence. Anyway, moving right along. The most we can hope for is to avoid the most tragic mistakes by exercising prudence. And I'm going to give a couple of examples from the current crisis, which I think show how prudence is actually quite rare today. Back in February, I remember that there were a few people walking around in homemade masks, or that they were wearing a scarf over their nose and mouth. And they were mocked by quite a few people. And some sort of apparently well-educated epidemiologists and other people were saying, oh, that's just silly, they don't really work. Now, of course, the advice is changing, and it's almost the opposite now. It's irresponsible to go out without a mask, a homemade mask or a shop-bought one. How did that change in 2 months? Well, the experts with their perfect mathematical models felt that something that only worked half the time wasn't good enough. They'd forgotten that when you're in a situation where there is a multiplication going on, if you can make the number multiplied smaller, then it has a huge difference over a period of time. And now I think it is quite well understood that even if you do catch coronavirus, you're likely to catch it with a smaller viral load. And if you do have it and you don't realize it, you're less likely to pass it on to other people. So in 2 months, prudence has been learnt by our government and by quite a few people. The massive emphasis on hospital care that we've seen over the last 2 generations, a lesson that my grandparents knew and which they taught me has been forgotten. My grandfather had a terror of hospitals. He basically saw them as killing machines because he remembered the time back in the 1930s and before when infectious diseases were rife, and the most likely place to catch an infectious disease was a hospital. Now, suddenly there is an infectious disease which is rife, and the best place to catch COVID-19 by far is a hospital, particularly one of these large centralized hospitals in the middle of towns and cities. When there's a widespread plague with no easy cure, then a hospital becomes a massive reservoir of infection. The old infectious disease hospitals were closed because they were considered a waste of money. They were put in out-of-the-way places that were hard to reach. They had big grounds where the patients were encouraged to sit outside on any day when it wasn't actually raining or snowing. They had huge windows that were open to the light and the air. People knew how to deal with infections that weren't under control. But now we have centralized and concentrated everything. A lack of prudence. And of course, we're finding out this week that care homes were almost forgotten in the rush to make sure that our hospitals were fully equipped. The emphasis on disposable equipment and disposable clothing, which has come in over the last 40 or 50 years, all to save money and for convenience sake. Everything disposable is easily guaranteed as being totally sterile. That's an advantage. But really it was the emphasis on cost efficiency. And now with supply chains breaking down, we discover that the endless cycle of using and disposing of aprons, uniforms, gowns, masks, all those things is hard to maintain. So prudence has been lacking. Now I want to get back to the Christian virtue of prudence, and so tomorrow I'm going to look at various biblical examples of how prudence works. Because it's something that we practice in real life, and the best way to learn prudence, in my view, is to watch how wise people live and to listen to the stories that wise people tell. But since this has lasted for nearly a quarter of an hour already, I'm going to stop for today. And tomorrow we'll be looking at Bible characters. You might like to have a bit of fun. Have a think who you know, whose story is in the Bible, who is an example of prudence in practice. Anyway, bye for now. I pray that God will bless you as you're in this time of waiting. Bye.